Papa's barbershop is a hub where all the locals gather. They chat about neighborhood gossip, crack jokes, and play chess, but its primary purpose is far more significant: to bring young men together under Papa's guidance in hopes of steering them away from the criminal world. Luke Cage has been working at the barbershop as a janitor for 6 months. After the big guy broke out of prison, he had to make a living by any means necessary. The only inconvenience: the swear jar. In his effort to make the world a better place, Papa implemented fines for anyone using foul language. Naturally, Luke's salary at the barbershop isn't even enough to cover rent. To make ends meet, he works evenings as a dishwasher at Harlem's Paradise, the largest nightclub in the city. Tonight, however, Luke has to swap his apron for a suit. He's filling in for a bartender who didn't show up for their shift. While Luke mixes cocktails, influential figures relax upstairs in the club: Cornell Stokes, the club's owner, and his cousin, city councilwoman Mariah. Meanwhile, outside the city, the duo's mercenaries attempt a job that costs some of them their lives. But none of this concerns Luke. After finishing his shift and charming a pretty woman, the big guy returns to his quiet life, unaware of the major changes coming his way. The next day, police arrive at the scene of a shootout where they discover several bodies. Detective Misty Knight, who turns out to be Luke's date from the night before, identifies one of the victims: Dante, the young bartender from Harlem's Paradise. News of the shootout also reaches Stokes. His men had double-crossed their partners and fled with the money he was expecting from a weapons deal. The crime boss is furious about the betrayal, but his anger intensifies when Shades, a supervisor from the Snakehead gang, arrives to oversee how Stokes will retrieve the stolen money. Hearing about the events, Papa is deeply upset. He tried to guide the young men, but they couldn't resist the temptation of easy money, landing themselves in trouble. Within hours, Stokes learns the names of the thieves and orders his men to track them down. By evening, one of the culprits is brought to the club. Hoping for a quick resolution, the thief offers to return the stolen money. But Stokes has no intention of letting it go that easily. He punishes the traitor so brutally that the man's body ends up in a city dump. When Papa learns that one thief has been killed and the other is being hunted, he hides the foolish young man in his barbershop. He asks Luke to speak with Stokes, offering to return the stolen money in exchange for the boy's life. The gangster is unimpressed by a dishwasher approaching him with such a bold request, but out of respect for Papa, he agrees to consider it. Meanwhile, an informant tells Stokes that the thief has been spotted somewhere in the city. Though Stokes orders no immediate action, one of his overzealous henchmen decides to take matters into his own hands. Ignoring Shade's suggestion to wait outside, the thug opens fire on the barbershop's glass windows. Luke shields a teenager who had come in for a haircut, but he isn't fast enough to push Papa out of harm's way. The old man collapses to the floor, bleeding heavily. Police arrive at the scene and Misty personally interrogates Luke. She senses he's hiding something, but what puzzles her most is how the bullets didn't harm him. Luke's body shows no signs of injury. Upon learning that his orders were ignored, Stokes throws the disobedient henchman off a rooftop. Yet the return of the stolen money in a backpack soothes the gangster's anger. Stokes plans to put the incident behind him and return to business as usual. Cage returns to the ruined barbershop to mourn his old friend. Confronted by one of Papa's close friends, Luke confesses that he cannot let Stokes get away with this crime. He vows to take away everything the gangster holds dear. Luke begins raiding every stash where Stokes hides his money and goods. He doesn't keep the cash, but ensures it gets discovered and confiscated by the cops. Stokes informs his sister that he plans to relocate the remaining assets to his main warehouse, unaware that this is exactly what Luke intended. Seizing the opportunity, Luke destroys Stokes' primary storage facility. Even a dozen armed guards cannot stop the hero. Bullets have no effect on him, and he easily fends off their attacks. Cornell learns Luke's identity from a crooked cop and decides to deal with him personally. Tracking Cage to a restaurant, the gangster launches a rocket into the building. Trapped under the rubble, Luke notices the cafe's owner, who has miraculously survived. To save her, the big guy lifts massive concrete slabs as if they weigh nothing. The elderly woman is immensely grateful, but demands to know how Luke possesses such superhuman strength. Her question sends Cage spiraling into memories of his past. Back to Seagate Prison, the place he recently escaped. With his formidable physique, the inmate caught the attention of the prison warden, who coerced Luke into participating in illegal fight rings. Threats and blackmail left Cage no choice but to agree. He fought to protect his prison friend and psychologist, Dr. Connors, with whom he had developed a mutual fondness. But even that wasn't enough for the warden. Deciding to dispose of his fighter, the warden sent 2 mercenaries after Luke. One of them was Shades. The men did their job well, beating Cage so severely that he was left with only hours to live. Learning of Luke's condition, Connors pleaded with the prison doctor, Noah Burstein, to do whatever it took to save him. Burstein agreed, placing Luke into an experimental tank. Unable to resist, Cage could only watch as wires and sensors were connected to him. The doctor sealed the capsule, but just then the warden burst into the lab. Unwilling to give Luke a chance, the warden raised the temperature in the tank to 200 degrees Celsius, determined to kill him. Miraculously, Luke survived. Emerging from the boiling tank, he realized that his genes had been altered. Now he possessed immense strength and unbreakable durability, unmatched by anyone. Back in the present, several firefighters and Detective Misty Knight witnessed Luke smashing through concrete slabs and emerging from the wreckage. After escaping from prison, Cage had gone straight to Connor's house. The woman assured him that she knew nothing of Burstein's experiments and had only wanted to save him and help him recover. In classic fashion, Cage didn't leave the doctor's kindness unappreciated. They spent the night together. Afterward, Luke Cage stopped hiding. He began helping clear debris from the restaurant, ignoring the bystanders recording him on their phones. Meanwhile, Stokes gathers his men and announces that he is bankrupt. One of Stokes' men suggests leaving Cage alone, but the crime boss doesn't take kindly to such advice. Furious, he eliminates the subordinate, vowing to crush the so-called hero into dust. Stokes orders his goons to hit the streets, taking money from anyone they come across. And when people complain or resist, they are to be told that Luke Cage is to blame. The thugs waste no time executing the plan. The city is paralyzed with fear, and people give up their last savings just to save their lives. Not even Aisha, a young woman who created a museum in honor of her father, a former athlete, is spared. The gangsters take her prized trophy ring, mocking her by saying she should thank Cage if she has a problem with it. Aisha tracks down Cage and tells him what's happening in the city, including how his name is being used to justify the violence. Meanwhile, Claire Temple arrives in her hometown to visit her mother and learn more about the man everyone is talking about. She believes Luke Cage is a superhero and that people like him desperately need support. Luke begins restoring order in the city, warning everyone to stop invoking his name in vain or face the consequences. His actions unsettle not only the criminals, but also the police. Detective Misty Knight asks him not to cross the line of the law. Cage assures her that he will disappear right after Papa's funeral. Shades also advises Stokes to leave Cage alone and focus on his debts. The advisor proposes selling the club as a solution, but Stokes vehemently refuses. The Harlem's Paradise is his pride and proof that a kid from the slums can build an empire. Luke Cage confronts Stokes directly at his hideout, determined to end things. Surrounded by the gangsters' guards, Luke effortlessly fends off their attacks, showcasing his superhuman abilities. Once again, Cage escapes without a scratch, but Shades recognizes his former cellmate. He informs Stokes about the experiments in prison and reveals the secret. Cage can only be killed with a special bullet. Known as the Judas bullet, the extraordinary ammunition costs several $1 million apiece. Stokes hopes Diamondback will lend him one on credit, but Shades warns that he'll have to sacrifice the club to get it. Stokes attends Papa's funeral. Aisha, clutching a pistol in her hand, prepares to avenge Papa's death and retrieve her stolen ring. However, Cage stops her just in time, promising to handle the situation himself. The crime boss delivers a deceitful speech to the gathered residents, winning their sympathy. But when Cage steps onto the stage, he reminds everyone who is truly responsible for Papa's death. Stokes meets with his informant, a corrupt cop, but the officer starts making demands, pushing the gangster to consider eliminating him. Before Stokes can act, witnesses arrive, and the detective is seriously injured in the chaos. Learning about the incident, Mariah is livid. Her cousin has been causing her endless problems, and now her election campaign is in jeopardy. Claire finally gets the opportunity to meet the superhero. She is amazed by Cage's abilities and offers to help him free the city. Arriving at Papa's barbershop, the pair discover the wounded officer lying inside. The wounded cop manages to confess that he worked for Stokes and reveals the crime boss's plans. At the same time, Knight searches for her missing partner, trying to understand why he betrayed his own. Cage is reluctant to save a police officer who caused the city as much harm as his boss. However, the cop finds a way to plead for help. He mentions a notebook containing evidence stored at his home. With it, they can send Stokes to prison for years. Knight and her new partner stake out the wounded cop's house, but that doesn't stop Cage from sneaking in and retrieving the notebook. Knowing Knight will figure out who was in the apartment, Cage anticipates that visitors might soon arrive at the barbershop. He decides to move the injured officer to a safer location, using a food delivery truck for the escape. Detectives do indeed inspect the barbershop, and Knight finds evidence proving her injured colleague was there. However, she doesn't notice her new partner reporting everything to Stokes. Stokes' men pursue the truck, keeping it in their sights and updating their boss on its location. Cage is forced to drive into a dark alley where he, Claire, and the wounded cop escape. The gangsters fire at the truck, but when they finally open the doors, they find it empty. Knight begins to suspect her partner is a traitor. She sets up a fake phone call to confirm her suspicions. When the truth comes to light, she confronts him and a struggle ensues, ending with a gunshot inside the car. Meanwhile, the gangsters locate the fugitives. Cage shields Claire and the officer with his body as bullets ricochet off him like they're hitting stone, giving Claire the chance to move the cop to safety. As Claire and the injured officer reach the road, a black truck speeds toward them. Thankfully, Cage arrives just in time, using his strength to turn the vehicle into a heap of wreckage. Knight arrives at the scene. Recognizing her partner, she rushes to him. Despite his betrayal, she begs her old friend to hold on, but it's too late. The officer dies in Knight's arms. As the group mourns, an entire squad of police officers arrives at Harlem's Paradise, arresting Cornell Stokes. Mariah learns of the arrest during an interview. Cage is hopeful that peace will finally come to the city, but local smugglers inform him that Stokes has been released. Indeed, after hiring the best lawyer, Stokes leaves the station with a smug grin, hinting to Knight that she'll never find evidence strong enough to bring him down. Shades again urges Stokes to forget about Cage and focus on his real problems. However, it seems that the superhero has become an obsession for the crime boss, driving him to madness. The head of the police department is fired, leaving Knight without support at work. She's explicitly told to drop the case against Stokes and instead focus her efforts on Luke Cage. Cage returns to Stokes' office after receiving a call from the gangster. Confident that he has nothing to fear, Cage plans to make Stokes confess his crimes. Instead, Stokes takes control of the situation. The crime boss reveals that he knows all about Cage's time in prison and threatens to expose the truth about Harlem's savior if Cage doesn't stay silent and follow his orders. Feeling cornered, Cage considers running away to start a new life far from Harlem. But Claire finds the words to stop him, inspiring him to think about saving the city once again. Cage starts his mission by visiting Delingo, one of Stokes' associates who recently bought several crates of stolen weapons. The thugs at Delingo's hideout are unaware of Cage's abilities and open fire on him. But when they see that the bullets leave holes only in his clothes, they realize they've made a grave mistake, angering their guest. Delingo wisely decides not to argue with the unflinching strongman and hands over the weapons. However, while Cage tries to do the right thing, Knight begins to doubt his integrity. After her cousin's reckless escapades, Mariah is forced to resign from her political position. The councilwoman visits Stokes to confront him, unloading her frustration about his destructive behavior. Mariah demands that Stokes back off from Luke Cage and stop tarnishing her political reputation, but the crime boss is baffled, unable to understand why everyone keeps pestering him with this request. Their argument escalates into a full-blown fight, with the cousins dredging up childhood grudges. One careless comment from Stokes pushes Mariah over the edge. In a fit of rage, she shoves him out of a second-story window. Stokes might have survived the fall, but instead of calling for an ambulance, Mariah decides to eliminate him for good. Grabbing a microphone stand, she strikes him repeatedly, delivering fatal blows. Shades witnesses the entire event. Calmly, he reassures Mariah and gives her critical advice on how to cover her tracks and avoid suspicion. Knight meets with Cage and asks him to share more about himself. She's trying to determine if the superhero is a threat. Luke, however, is tight-lipped. He simply asks Knight not to interfere and to let him carry out justice by taking down Stokes. When the police receive word that the restaurant owner has been murdered, Knight is convinced Cage is responsible. In reality, at that very moment, Luke is strolling through the city with Claire, reminiscing about their childhoods. The couple pauses in a park, and a romantic spark flickers between them. But as they gaze into each other's eyes, a sniper emerges from the bushes, shooting Cage in the stomach with a Judas bullet. Luke collapses, and Claire is unable to help him. Desperate, she calls an old friend with a private ambulance for assistance. The sniper isn't done yet. He chases the ambulance and, when given the chance, rams it, causing the vehicle to flip. Hearing the sniper's voice, Cage immediately recognizes him. It's his childhood best friend, Diamondback. Before Cage can confront him, the criminal is forced to flee as police sirens draw closer. Knight investigates the crime scene at the club. She pieces together a timeline of events from the day of the murder. Interviewing a tearful Mariah and the restaurant staff, she hears the same story from all of them. Luke Cage was the killer. Mariah speaks to reporters, successfully convincing Harlem's residents that Cage has betrayed them and is now the city's greatest threat. Claire takes Cage to the hospital to remove the bullet. However, they're met with another surprise. Even at the wound site, Luke's skin is so tough that the surgical tools bend and break in the nurse's hands. Claire performs an ultrasound, uncovering an even graver problem. The Judas bullet has fragmented inside Luke's body, and the shards are slowly killing him. Knight informs Cage that he is the prime suspect in Stokes' murder and needs to come to the station to testify. During the conversation, Cage realizes it's a trap. While the detective distracts him, an expert is tracing the call. Police raid the barbershop and, unsurprisingly, discover bloody gloves, evidence that seemingly incriminates Cage. Knight eventually finds the fugitives and learns the truth about the assassination attempt on Cage. While this convinces her of his innocence, it's unlikely to be enough to clear him in court. A shootout erupts at the clinic, and several bullets narrowly miss Cage, embedding themselves in the walls. Despite his worsening condition, Cage musters enough strength to capture the shooter and engage in hand-to-hand combat. Face to face with Diamondback, Cage confirms his suspicions, but struggles to understand why his former friend has turned against him. Diamondback escapes, but Cage resolves to track him down and get to the bottom of it. The rivals confront each other in an opera house. After a brief exchange of accusations, they clash in a brutal fight. Weakened by pain, Cage struggles to fend off the attacks, but ultimately proves stronger than Diamondback. Meanwhile, Knight detains Claire, attempting to charge her with complicity in Cage's alleged crimes. Her behavior crosses the line, and the department's new chief intervenes, halting the interrogation and suspending Knight from duty. Cage steps outside, but Diamondback continues his pursuit. Exhausted, Cage pleads with his former friend to lower his weapon, reminding him of the brotherly bond they once shared. Diamondback, however, delivers a shocking revelation. He is Cage's biological brother. Knight is assigned sessions with a psychologist to determine why she lost her temper with Claire. While Knight is under evaluation, Diamondback declares himself the new ruler of Harlem. Breaking into Stokes' office, he guns down loyal gangsters who haven't even crossed him yet, asserting dominance. He takes particular issue with Shades, who has assumed a leadership role that Diamondback feels isn't rightfully his. Cage makes it to a laundromat where he changes into clean clothes. There, he catches a news broadcast and learns he's now officially a wanted man. His escape is short-lived. A police patrol spots him on the street. Surrounded and at gunpoint, Cage tries to reason with the officers. When that fails, he's forced to use his strength to disarm them and hijack their car. Mariah approaches Domingo, asking him to take her cousin's place in the arms business. First, however, she tasks him with gathering all the crime bosses to discuss the power shift and new rules. Cage finds Claire at a local cafe, barely holding on. Realizing he'll die if the bullet fragments aren't removed, Claire concludes their only hope is Dr. Noah Burstein. The two leave the city, heading toward the coast, with Seagate Prison visible in the distance. As Cage's condition worsens and his cries of pain grow louder, Claire urges him to hold on. Claire finds Burstein's home and explains that the experiment on Cage was a success, but now he urgently needs the doctor's help. Burstein examines Cage, but fails to penetrate his skin. Even needles break against his armored body. To assist, Cage hands over a flash drive he took from Dr. Connors, containing all the experimental data. With this, Burstein can replicate the original conditions. After studying the data, Burstein concludes there's only one solution: submerge Cage in boiling acid and recreate the temperature conditions from his transformation. Claire is skeptical of the plan's safety, but with no other options, she reluctantly agrees to assist. Before stepping into the tank, Cage tells Claire to be careful. If something goes wrong and he doesn't survive, she must take the flash drive and escape. Submerged in the solution, Cage endures excruciating pain. Burstein raises the temperature, but the intended effect doesn't occur. Suddenly, the monitor blares an alarm. Cage's heart has stopped. Claire improvises, tossing an electrical lamp into the tank to jumpstart his heart. The tactic works temporarily, but Cage's condition remains critical. Claire has another idea. She raises the temperature to its maximum. As Cage begins to cook in the saline solution, the heat finally loosens the bullet fragments, allowing Claire to extract them. Meanwhile, Diamondback invites Mariah to see his prized possession, crates of Judas bullets. He boasts that with these, they can dominate not just the underworld, but the city itself. As Cage recovers, Claire tends to his wounds. Burstein, fascinated by the flash drive's data, is overjoyed. He believes the experiment could save humanity, curing aging and unlocking incredible potential. Claire, however, warns him to abandon the idea. Cage's transformation has already proven how dangerous this technology can be, potentially leading to the destruction of the entire planet. Diamondback decides to test his inventions by donning a power-enhancing glove and hood, giving himself superhuman strength. He takes to the streets, attacking people while claiming to be Luke Cage. The police launch an intense manhunt for the suspect. Those who know Cage well are certain it's a setup, but the police chief orders the criminal to be apprehended within hours. Meanwhile, as Burstein steps out of the house, Cage and Claire discuss their escape plan, realizing the doctor has lost his grip on reality, consumed by his own success. Before leaving, Luke decides to review the files on the flash drive. Among the data, he finds video recordings made by Reva. To his shock, he learns that Reva not only knew about the experiments conducted in the prison, but also handpicked participants. Her primary task had been to lure Luke into the program. Heartbroken by this betrayal, Cage struggles to accept the truth, but resolves to leave Burstein behind. Mariah continues to stir unrest in the city, turning the public against Cage. Her manipulations quickly bear fruit. The city rises in anger. Cage and Claire leave town, taking the flash drive with them. They believe they've destroyed all data, preventing Burstein from repeating the experiment. However, the doctor manages to boot up an old laptop containing the files. Cage takes Claire to a church where his father once preached. Immersed in childhood memories, Luke finally understands what Diamondback meant. He is indeed Luke's half-brother on their father's side. At Stokes' memorial service, Mariah publicly blames Cage for his death. She declares that the superhero poses a global threat and urges everyone to stand together and help capture this dangerous criminal. When Cage returns to the city, he discovers he still has supporters. A young man warns him about the escalating situation, prompting Cage to head to Harlem's Paradise to confront Mariah. Detective Misty Knight also arrives at Harlem's Paradise, drawing the attention of both Cage and Diamondback. Diamondback finds Misty first and opens fire. Cage arrives just in time to shield her with his body, carrying her to safety behind the bar. A shootout erupts in the club. As panicked patrons flee, many spot Cage but can't discern who initiated the violence. When the chaos subsides slightly, Cage examines Misty and realizes she's been injured. He carries her to the kitchen, barricading the door, but knows it won't hold for long. Shades advises his crew to leave before the cops arrive, but Diamondback refuses to go until Cage is in his grasp. Those unable to escape are taken hostage, including Claire. Despite the danger, Claire remains hopeful that Cage will return to save them. Diamondback reveals his plan: to kill Cage and declare to the city that they've eliminated a terrorist. Cage notices Misty is losing blood rapidly. He realizes that without immediate help, she won't survive, and if anyone breaches the kitchen, it could be the end for her. Diamondback launches a powerful projectile at the kitchen door, but Cage and Misty have already escaped into a hidden basement. As SWAT teams arrive at the nightclub, Diamondback forces a hostage to call the police and claim that Cage is holding everyone captive. Misty tries to call her boss to reveal the truth, but her damaged phone dies before she can finish. She urges Cage to end the conflict, but he refuses to leave her side, knowing she won't survive without care. Claire, allowed to treat a hostage with an injured leg, learns about the hidden basement. She realizes Cage must be hiding there. Feigning an emergency need for insulin, Claire sneaks into the kitchen, takes out a guard, and begins searching for the secret entrance. Meanwhile, a mayoral aide arrives and suggests using extreme measures to capture Cage, with Mariah Dillard endorsing the plan. Just as Cage contemplates whether he's wasting precious time not saving the hostages, he hears a knock. Breaking through the wall with a single punch, Luke finds Claire. Before they can exchange words, Misty collapses, and Cage rushes to save her. Under Diamondback's orders, a hostage contacts the police again, demanding a helicopter in Cage's name. This raises doubts for the police chief, who starts questioning whether Cage is truly responsible. After a few hostages are released, a police officer notes inconsistencies in their testimonies. Many state that shots were fired at Cage, not by him. The police chief advises keeping suspicions about Cage's innocence quiet for now, focusing first on taking control of the situation. Diamondback contacts Luke over the loudspeaker, ordering him to surrender or he'll start killing hostages one by one. Realizing this is no bluff, Cage asks Claire to stay with Misty and heads upstairs. Calmly walking past the guards, Cage endures their taunts, despite their foolish attempts to provoke him. Meanwhile, Diamondback prepares his final Judas bullet, determined to eliminate the brother he believes stole his life. In the kitchen, Shades discovers the hidden basement entrance. He cuts the power, plunging the club into complete darkness. Spotting Misty in the shadows, Shades moves to silence the key witness. However, Claire launches a surprise attack, displaying remarkable strength. Together, Claire and Misty manage to fend off Shades, who collapses after a fierce struggle. At the last moment, the police chief orders the SWAT team to stand down, warning them that Cage might not be guilty. Meanwhile, Luke frees the hostages but remains behind to confront his brother. Diamondback, as always, uses a young woman as a human shield. The SWAT team warns Cage that their weapons are loaded with Judas bullets. Cage realizes he could escape, but doing so would leave the terrified girl in danger. As the soldiers close in, Diamondback flees, confident that Cage will be executed on the spot. Rather than resist, Cage surrenders. However, Misty convinces the police chief to reconsider, asserting that Cage isn't guilty. Diamondback escapes through a back exit, while Shades is cuffed and taken into custody despite his injuries. When Luke steps outside, the crowd of Harlem residents greets him as a hero, chanting their belief in his innocence. Misty catches up to Cage, hinting that he could escape once he's brought to the station. But instead, Luke decides to act immediately, leaping from the transport vehicle and disappearing into the city's dark alleys. One officer corners Cage in an alley, only to recognize him as Papa's old friend. Trusting Luke's intentions, the officer lets him go, hoping he'll catch the real culprit. Despite being hunted by every cop in the city, Cage continues to protect Harlem. Stopping a robbery, he earns the gratitude of a store owner who gives him a jacket to help him stay incognito. The girl Cage saved during the raid calls Detective Knight, asking for a meeting to provide testimony in his defense. In a secluded park, the two meet and the girl reveals the truth. Luke Cage didn't kill Stokes. Cage tracks Diamondback to his warehouse, finding the bodies of his associates. The sole survivor reveals Diamondback's name before succumbing to his injuries. Hearing a strange beep, Cage discovers a bomb planted in the building. Grabbing the smuggler, he carries him to safety just as the explosion destroys the warehouse. In gratitude, the man warns Cage about Diamondback's latest weapon, something even Luke might not be able to stop. That evening, Mariah and Shades visit Papa's barbershop, offering a truce. As a gesture of goodwill, they hand Cage a folder containing his prison records and evidence of his innocence. Their conversation is interrupted by Knight, who arrives to charge Mariah with her brother's murder. Before the situation can escalate, Diamondback throws grenades into the barbershop and storms in, ready for a final showdown with his brother. For their climactic fight, Diamondback dons a specially designed suit matching Cage's strength and durability. The battle spills out onto the street, drawing a crowd of Harlem residents rallying behind their hero. Initially overwhelmed by Diamondback's enhanced strength, Cage summons all his resolve, delivering a blow that leaves his brother incapacitated. Diamondback, broken and defeated, is strapped to a stretcher and taken to the hospital. The crowd cheers for Cage, showering him with gratitude. Meanwhile, the girl who witnessed the events texts Knight, agreeing to an official interrogation. Mariah is arrested, but she remains confident there isn't enough evidence to convict her. She hints at having taken precautions, mentioning that Shades has used Knight's stolen phone to silence the girl who could bury them both. Knight later informs Cage and Claire that Mariah has been released once again. For Luke, this means only one thing: he must stay in Harlem to protect it from evil and corruption. Little does he know, Diamondback has been entrusted to the care of none other than Dr. Noah Burstein, who sees this as another opportunity to perfect his experiments. This is where the first season ends.